All right, hello to Cooper and Leo and Henry and who else is absent? I think other people are absent too.
Why are they not here?
What's that?
Why are they not here?
Let's see, Henry and Leo are in New York City. Cooper, I think, is doing climbing. And we may be missing Lauren. Are we also missing Lauren? So, those 4 students will be watching this recording, but it's not for the general public. I would like to have your feedback on the proposition I posed while I was setting up my equipment. Do you think Andrew Jackson should lose the honor of being on the $20 bill? That was quite a discussion we had in this country. In fact, he was pretty likely to be replaced until the Obama administration decided instead to replace Alexander Hamilton on the 10. Andrew Jackson is a controversial figure in US history. Definitely the highlight of chapter 10 is what's good and what's bad about Andrew Jackson. Let's just consider what's on both sides of the ledger. It's great, it's where the chapter starts. The chapter discusses how Andrew Jackson took over the White House. And actually this chapter's been edited, but when I taught this chapter before, in the old version of the book, they talked about when he was inaugurated, he had this huge party and all these common people came, and for the first time they had like 20 spittoons around the White House because his crowd was kind of a low-rent redneck crowd. If you had to say what's good or bad about Andrew Jackson, in other words, does he deserve to be memorialized on the $20 bill? What might go in that discussion? Kylie.
I think one of the things that was most well-known bad thing about him was his actions towards Native Americans and kicking them off of their land.
Very cruel toward the Native Americans. And what is the particular event or series of events?
Trail of Tears.
Trail of Tears means what?
It was basically, I think it was, they were moving Native American tribes from their homeland to Oklahoma, and they weren't saying please go. They were basically forcing them to go, and I think a quarter of the population died on the trail or something.
Yeah, good memory. So you recall that during this early period of U.S. history, some tribes fought back, and that never worked out, right? And some tribes tried to become civilized, meaning sort of assimilate more in American culture. And some of the tribes we now associate with Oklahoma were in fact in the southeast, like the Cherokee, right? I mean, Choctaw, other tribes, the Seminoles, other tribes that are, well known now, actually relocated. All the Seminoles were dug in and fought in Florida. Anyway, so 5 of the more civilized tribes presented a claim that got all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And what did the Supreme Court say, by the way, when the Native Americans lawyer made the claim look, we play by the rules. The state of Georgia shouldn't be allowed to kick us out. What did the Supreme Court say? Anybody recall? The Supreme Court said, you're right. Not exactly because the Supreme Court was sensitive to the concerns of Native Americans, but because the Supreme Court wanted the federal government to be the boss of the Native Americans. And how did Andrew Jackson respond? Did you recall reading what he said at that point? A former judge, a former lawyer says...
He basically said, okay, you can say that, but I'm still going to do what I want.
The Supreme Court John Marshall has issued his ruling. Now let him enforce it. So he said, I don't care. And he was by far the cruelest president toward Native Americans. So that part of his legacy isn't so good. Any other aspects of Jackson's legacy that are noteworthy? Anybody have anything else to mention? Jackson looks a lot different from the presidents that preceded him. I mean, of course, he's another white guy, and that's kind of the profile for every president. But in some respects, he's very different from his predecessors. Anybody know how? It's kind of a good thing. Sagarika.
He wasn't he didn't come from a rich family. He had more humble backgrounds.
Yeah, to be sure, he was rich by this time. Did you have a hand up too, Tanner? Yeah, he rose from very little in what was then sort of the western part of the United States. I mean, now we'd still consider it to be the southeast, I suppose. But back then it was kind of the western extreme. And where did most of the presidents come from before this time? I mean, almost all. Anybody know? Megan knows.
I just say wealthy backgrounds.
Yes, and geographically, where were almost all of them from? Kira?
Virginia.
Virginia. It's crazy how many of our presidents came from Virginia. In fact, prior to Jackson, every president came from 2 states, Virginia and... You want to see me do this gesture some more? Maybe this will help. Come on. Massachusetts. In fact, one thing I really recommend you do, we did this for modern U.S. history. Try and remember the succession of presidents, right? We know the first 2. Who was the first? He's on a bill too. Who was our first president?
George Washington.
George Washington. 8 years, right? He could have been president until he died. He could have been king. He serves for 8 years, kind of establishes 8 years as a good amount of time to serve, although we don't create a term limit of 8 years until after FDR. Who's next? After Washington steps down following 8 years in office, his successor is
John Adams.
John Adams. Plain old John Adams. Okay? Who follows John Adams? One of his old rivals. And John Adams serves how many terms? Yeah, just 1 term, just 4 years. Now, he had been known for his moderation, for, his diplomacy. He was actually on a diplomatic mission at the time the Constitution was written. He had been in Europe. He was the one who defended the British accused of the Boston Massacre. I mean, he seemed like a balanced guy, kind of interested in civil liberties, and he sort of went nuts as a president. He was really hostile to any sort of dissent. And he was kind of in the pocket of the Northeast, the kind of industrial, early industrial interests, and he didn't last that long. So who takes over? His longtime rival, who takes over at the turn of the century?
Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah, I think my namesake. I'm not sure why my parents named him Tom, but I think he goes after Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson served, and he's from what state? Virginia. And why is it that Virginia has so many presidents? Anybody know? Rich states, and in this era, Virginia's crops were our leading export. Virginia had been Washington State. The rest of the country wasn't doing that well economically. Slave states had disproportionate political power. Why was that? Why were slave states sort of more powerful in the Congress than they should have been? Anybody know? Go ahead, Sagrika.
Are you sure you don't?
Oh, yeah, I know Kira's going to get the right answer. Anybody else? Who knows? Why are slave states, I don't want to always go to the same people. Why are slave states more powerful politically than they should have been? And Virginia had a lot more clout than it should have had prior to the era of, say, Reconstruction. Okay, I guess it's not really that much diversity here, but we'll go with Kira from Crestwood.
I'm not totally sure, but I feel like it was because they had a huge control over kind of the economy, like
That was part of it. Tiffany, what's another part of it?
The 3/5 slave rule.
Yes, so slaves, while they couldn't vote, still counted as 3/5 of a person in determining representation in Congress. And so relative to the white population, the actual population of people with the right to vote, the South had disproportionate power. Anyway, so we're making a list of a long succession of presidents, most of whom came from Virginia and a few from Massachusetts. So in 1800, Jefferson's elected, serves for how many terms? Here's a quick cheat sheet. If your name isn't Adams, you serve for 8 years prior to Jackson, okay? Everyone who isn't named Adams served for 8 years prior to Jackson, okay? So Thomas Jefferson serves for 8 years. Who follows TJ? Anybody know? You ever drive around by Jefferson Middle School, or what's it called now, ATA? That's a good place to remember the presidents, because every street's named after presidents. Just think, just drive west in your mind, or ride your bike west. What are some streets you cross when you get off of College Hill? Anybody know? This guy's famous for writing most of the Constitution. He's next, because it was just a rotation of Virginians. All right, next man up from Virginia, you get to be president. Who's next? Does anybody know? Very much like Jefferson. It's James Madison. And he's super well educated. He wrote a huge number of the Federalist Papers, wrote the Constitution, extensive, education and legal training, and, kind of more of the same, right? Definitely not of the common people. And when he served for 8 years, because his name's not Adams, who's next? Who's after Madison? Another M name, and he's got a doctrine named after him. Tiffany knows.
Is it Monroe?
It's Monroe, James Monroe, 2 James back to back. So Monroe will serve for 8 years. And now with those 3 consecutive Virginians, all of whom are in this, hybrid Republican-Democrat party, now we have a guy from Massachusetts. Who comes from Massachusetts? I give you a hint, it's a name we've heard before.
John Quincy Adams.
John Quincy Adams. And what's his relationship to John Adams?
Son.
Son, yeah, it's the son of John Adams. And, he very much follows in his father's footsteps, super well educated, rich, born into an elite family, and, definitely represents the upper crust in society. Now here comes Jackson. And that's why we went through this whole chronology to see that there's been nobody like Jackson. Jackson was a military guy. And what's his claim to fame? What had he done that got him elected with virtually no prior political experience? He was a hero. Why? Why does anyone get to be a hero? All right, Luis.
He fought or?
Yeah, in what war? What war, Tanner? War of 1812, and he won a particular battle that earned him fame. What battle did he win? Anybody know? Kira knows what battle?
Battle in New Orleans.
Yeah, New Orleans. And remember, this is the one where the communication went out that, oh, guys, we worked things out, no need to fight anymore. But because everything moved so slowly back then, we didn't have the internet or the phone, they just didn't receive word. And Old Hickory was his name. Old Hickory thumped some British. And that's why he won his fame. So on the pro ledger, we have military heroism. I think part of the reason Obama didn't axe him is because he is sort of a folk hero for people of, modest economic background in the South. And what was his big achievement domestically? Anybody know? If you had to note the most significant aspect of Jacksonian democracy, like the change that we saw throughout the country that kind of coincides with his emergence, what would you say the most significant change is for the good here?
Minimize federal government's power. I don't know if that's necessarily for
He said he was going to do that. Very much like Ronald Reagan and some of these, small national government types. He said he was going to do that, but during the nullification crisis, he actually aggrandized federal power. I see what you're saying. Like ostensibly, which means officially, he was a warrior for states' rights and, opposed to, the national bank, which is true. But in some respects, he strengthened the federal government. I think there's a less ambiguous thing that sort of coincides, a way that America is different. The year he takes office, America's very different. Kyra.
Was it the 2 parties?
That's huge. I don't know that he gets credit for it, but explain what you mean.
Oh, well, there was like the era of like good feelings where there's general everybody kind of agreed on all policies. And
Yeah, this term didn't get hardly any run in the new version of the book. It used to get more discussion. The era of good feelings describes the presidencies of Madison and Monroe. It just means there wasn't much partisan rancor. There really wasn't much of an alternative to the ruling party, and there wasn't much party politics. But when Jackson takes over, then what do we have at this time?
You kind of get 2 parties to form. You have the Democrats and the Whigs.
Yeah.
And so one party is kind of more in favor of like a stronger government,
Right.
and one party doesn't want as much government.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Still, I wouldn't say that is the most sort of noteworthy social change of the day. I think it definitely marks a departure from the prior era, much more partisan politics. I'm thinking more of a social trend, sort of an expansion of the polity. You know what the term polity means? The people who vote. Now you know what I'm talking about. What am I talking about? By 1840, the U.S. voting population looks very different from how it looked at the time of the Revolution. Now you know what I'm talking about. Is that a hand up, Jacob?
No,
You want to take a stab at it?
no.
No. how the US voting population looks a lot different in 1840 compared to the time of the Revolution. Kira knows.
Pretty much every white male would be able to vote.
Here's the thing, right? Megan, continue. You want to add more?
90% of adult white men were eligible.
Perfect. So this was not true of England. In fact, England had a tiny fraction of white men voting. And of course, this is still such a tiny subset of all the people living in the United States. It's hard to extol this as a great step toward democracy, but it's a baby step, right? Whereas we formerly had in many different colonies, and certainly in England, property requirements for voting. Basically, by the time of Jackson, we had undone virtually all the property requirements. By 1840, what was the last U.S. state to get rid of property requirements? It's kind of famous. Anybody know this? Don't tell me, I'm not going to screw up your name. This is...
Sacagawea.
No, don't tell me that. This is Druthy, go ahead. Pigtails kind of screwed me up. Don't screw me up.
I never worked.
Rhode Island, tell me the story of Rhode Island.
Wasn't it called like the Door War?
The Door War or the Door Rebellion. What's that about? We're having a great sort of preview. What's going on with the Door Rebellion?
Well, it was like you had to have a certain amount of property,
Right.
and so the people who weren't able to vote, they like made a new state constitution.
Right. Yeah, so the leader of this group in Rhode Island was Dorr. His last name was D-O-R-R. And so basically Rhode Island, as a manufacturing state, didn't have the widespread opportunity for lower class people to acquire land. It's a small state. I mean, it's much smaller than Lane County. Lane County is the size of Connecticut. So a tiny fraction of Lane County is the size of Rhode Island. Rhode Island is tiny. And there's just not enough land to go around, and now people are all involved in working for wages, and so there's just a whole group of people that has no hope of meeting the property requirement to vote. And of course, the people running the state want to retain this strict property requirement. So Dorr leads an effort to change the Constitution of Rhode Island, and when the elites aren't interested, he says, well, heck with you, we're going to have our own separate government. And around this time, the federal government says, nah, we don't really work that way, and sends in troops, and then Dorr spends 2 years in prison. But it's more noteworthy that this was the last holdout. This state, Rhode Island, was the last holdout for the property requirement. Okay, any other noteworthy things that Jackson did? I want to explore what Kira's talking about. Was he an advocate for the states? Was he an advocate for the federal government? Or maybe a little bit of both? Anybody want to be heard on that question? Where do you think he was as far as the power of the federal government? Which way would you, where would you characterize him on the spectrum between, say, Calhoun, who wants to nullify federal legislation, and, you know, the Adams clan, you know, the former Federalists, the ones that really love the grandizing federal power? Where do you put Andrew Jackson? Now remember, he got elected as a war hero, and so the book kind of snidely noted, he was a president who left office with more principles than he had when he arrived, which is kind of the opposite of how it usually happens. All these idealistic presidents like, you know, Jimmy Carter, finding you can't continue with all those principles once you have to make decisions. But he was kind of a blank slate. He was kind of learning as he went. So Kira, what would you say is the best characterization of Andrew Jackson's perspective on federal power?
I think that he came in trying to minimize it as much as possible, but once the possibility of states like leaving the union, he definitely strengthened the whole thing and pretty much said no one's allowed to leave.
You know, that's a pretty accurate characterization. I think he came in with a general orientation to favor the Southeast, to favor kind of the, really what was then called the Southwest, right? I mean, he's from Tennessee. To favor agrarian interests as opposed to elite interests. And here's the problem, right? He was no fan of a national bank, no fan of all the people who wanted to channel more power to the wealthy Northeasterners. But the problem was when South Carolina said, we nullify federal legislation, I think that sort of kicked in this belligerent side of Andrew Jackson, which is like, when people resist me, I basically kill them or move them. I don't really know anything about reconciliation or compromise. Are you challenging me? Because you saw what happened in Florida. You saw what happened to the British. You're watching what's happening to the Indians. I take names and kick butts, and that's how I respond to people who challenge me. And so I think it wasn't so much that he had carefully thought out which parts of a strong central government he wanted to preserve, but he sure didn't want to hear defiance, right? So let's conclude this discussion. Do you think he belongs on our $20 bill? I mean, how many bills do we have? 1, 5, 20, 100, that's it, right? Am I 50? Is there a 50? I guess there's a 50. We only got 5 slots for presidents. Do you think he belongs in one of the 5 slots? Oh, is there 2? There is a 2, isn't
No
there?
one looks.
That's 20, 50, 100.
So how many you count? 6? If you put a 2 in there, which is really an oddball. Does anybody know who's on the 2? Who's on the 2?
I never want to.
Ah. So who thinks we want Andrew Jackson to retain his spot on the $20 bill? Nobody. All right, who wants to get rid of him? That's the typical Eugene crowd here. Leaders. Well, now this is the reputation he would eventually acquire as King Andrew. Now, which group in the U.S. would deride him as a king, as someone who wanted to sort of, strengthen the federal government's power? Which, if you had to label the group of people who probably put this cartoon on their walls, what would you label that group as? We've already heard the name. Give you a hint. What group generally opposes the king? Starts with a W. Whigs, yes, W-H-I-G. And that's kind of historically in England been the anti-establishment party. And so if you're going to name your party the Whigs, you might want to call your opponent the king. All right, so Jacksonian democracy is a term that at least includes Jackson's presidency, but it also refers more generally to some trends we've been discussing. So the elimination of the property requirement, I misspoke. By 1860, all but one state had eliminated the property requirement for voting. I'm not 100% sure if that's Rhode Island. I know when the Dorr Rebellion was repressed, it was only a matter of time before Rhode Island got rid of its property requirements. But this is ultimately called the Dorr War, the Dorr Rebellion. When Rhode Island tried to retain its property requirements in 1841 and 1842, a group of people said, that's not how we do it in the U.S. All right, more on the triumph of democracy. These propertyless wage earners, mostly people who worked in factories, couldn't vote. And so the labor movement rallied around the cause of diversifying, at least among white men, the people who could vote, expanding suffrage to poor white men. They went outside normal channels because the elites had kind of locked down the normal channels. So they had an extra legal, meaning outside the normal laws, convention that approved the new state constitution. And whether or not you believe in their cause, the federal government's going to regard this kind of more in the category of Shays' Rebellion, like a bad precedent. This could be, the sort of act that maybe while itself is not intrinsically destabilizing or that objectionable, it sets a precedent for others who aren't happy with their state governments to just go off in their own direction. So when Thomas Dorr is picked as governor, President Tyler, this is a successor to Jackson, he sends in federal troops and the Dorr movement collapses. But this whole episode is more noteworthy because it culminates this long trend to give all white men the vote. Why not women? Why not give women the vote in this era? Anybody know? I mean, the argument for, I'm not saying you have to agree, right? But the argument for white men to get the vote, whether they're poor or rich, kind of seems to extend to women, at least intuitively, right? I mean, if all people who are free are citizens, why shouldn't women vote? And of course, you don't have to agree, because we all agree today women should vote. But why do you think, Kira, the suffrage movement hadn't really gained any steam for women yet?
They said that women acted on passion when men acted on reason.
Yeah, I mean, back in this era, anytime there was a hierarchy, a stratification, they would always sort of make up some screwy theories of, innate disqualification, like, African Americans and immigrants from this country, well, they're not as bright, see, and, none of it made any sense if you had, any sort of medical research, you'd see that all people from all over are the same. But, same with women, they would say there are these inherent limitations of women, they're too prone to acting on passion, not cool rationality. Meanwhile, let the guys go kill a bunch of Indians and have duels, and we'll demonstrate our cool rationality. What's another reason why the women weren't given suffrage? Anybody know? It's kind of practical. In an era where, virtually everyone was married, households had the right to vote. And I'm not saying this is defensible, but one aspect was, given this social notion that the man controlled the household, it's kind of this notion, one household, one vote, right? Doctrine of coverture. Women were covered by the authority of the man, so it's just a lot of social conservatism. And of course, racism accounts for the failure to extend suffrage to non-whites. A French guy comes and checks out the U.S. I got some Frenchies in here, right? My French immersion people? Okay. Who's this French dude? Anybody know?
It's the Togo, what's it called?
Alexis, do you know how to?
Alexis de
De Tocqueville. Yeah, Alexis de Tocqueville. And I typically see both the little DE and, space Tocqueville, Tocqueville. Why did he come to the United States? Anybody know? Why would he come here? What was his goal? Sorry.
It was, he wanted to he was supposed to do something with prisons.
Yeah, he studied in prisons initially, but then he changed his focus to look at what. He just was very interested in American democracy. Why is this an issue of great interest to French people? What's been going on in France since the American Revolution? Kind of just calm, mellow, history without any kind of noteworthy events? Or was there something significant? Myra?
The French Revolution?
The French Revolution, what's the year of that?
Oh,
The year our Constitution's approved.
it
Tiffany?
starts in 1789.
1789. How does the French Revolution compare to the U.S. Revolution?
Very bloody.
Yeah, very tumultuous. They cut off the head of the king, and it was more of a social revolution within a country, right? And then what happened next? So by the mid-19th century, the French society's gone off in a different direction. What comes after the French Revolution? I mean, France just was on a roller coaster ride. Give you a hint, stands about this tall. Napoleon. And, so it was just a very unstable country. Napoleon rose to power and basically wanted to be another emperor and fight the rest of Europe and took over a lot of the countries and, that story. Anyway, so France has had a very unstable experience with democracy. And it's kind of, lurched back and forth between periods of great elitism and then this experiment with egalitarian democracy that didn't really work out to be as socially stable as people wanted. And so the French are very interested to see what's going on in the U.S. What is the main conclusion of de Tocqueville when he comes to the U.S.? What's his number one observation? Anybody know? Our democracy sucks. It is a ripoff of European democracy. It is innovative and commendable in some respects, or it is just nothing special. He turned around and went home, checked out a few prisons. Which was it? What was his reaction to U.S. democracy? Anybody know? Anybody catch this? He said it was fantastically innovative, right? Our democratic political institutions were only part of the story, and his number one observation is that there's a whole social aspect to U.S. democracy. This commitment to equality, this commitment to widespread public service and engagement. That now democracy is really a cultural attribute of American life. It's not just a political system, but I think this is true. It's a really good observation. It becomes part of our national identity, so long as you're a white male, which is really a shame in this period. All right, let's move on. So there's something called the Information Revolution. What happened to newspapers in this period? And by this period, what we're talking about in the book is the period, I think, 1815 to 1840. Basically the period after the end of the War of 1812 until 1840. So what happened to newspapers during this period? More, less, why? Who knows? Right now, newspapers are probably the worst stock you can buy. There's probably, does anybody in this room want to be a newspaper reporter? Check yourself before you wreck yourself. That is a job that's just not on an upswing. It's like trying to be an architect or a lawyer for that matter. Actually, right now the legal market's kind of going to tailspin. Don't try and be a newspaper reporter. Newspapers are circling the drain right now. But in 1850 through 1840, what was the trend with newspapers? Megan, was that a hand up?
Yeah, weren't they like the highest ever in production, or like to that point in production?
Production skyrocketed. Why did we have so many more newspapers all of a sudden? Always looking for new faces. Druthy's face is a welcome face. What do you think?
Well, didn't they have like 2 newspapers, like one for each party?
So there's a rise in partisan politics, and because there's no internet and there's really not much other means of communication besides the printing press, the parties needed to have their toehold in every community. So every community, you know, it's not so significant during the era of good feeling when we're basically a one-party country. But as, you know, we get closer, like by the time of Adams, there's a huge fight between the parties. And as we get closer to Jacksonian democracy, every community's got 2 papers. Now, how does our total number of newspapers in circulation compare to that of Europe, which is 10 times bigger than the US? Anybody know? What's that comparison? We got more. Isn't that crazy? We have 1/10 the population of Europe, and yet we have greater weekly circulation than Europe. Now you could attribute it not only to the need for the parties to reach out and spread their message. You could attribute it to the fact that we have a politically engaged society in which, you know, all white men virtually can vote. So a lot of people want to keep up with the news, right? You could attribute it to the fact that it's easier to make newspapers because steam power, what's steam power? Do they find a geyser and harness the power of the geyser? What's steam power? I don't know.
Isn't it where they have put a bunch of coal?
Yeah.
And then they heat up the coal that heats up water and
Yeah,
steam comes
yeah.
out
So,
and it rotates.
I mean, they do this today. They were going to build a massive power plant in Coburg, Oregon with the same idea, with natural gas that would heat steam, and then the rising steam turns a turbine. It's basically the same thing that's happening at rivers, but it's how you have mechanization when you don't have a river, basically. And so that turbine powers the press, and so we can make, with steam power, we can make a lot more newspapers in a short amount of time. So universal suffrage, of course, extends only to white men. I've already gone over that. Universal, we've already gone over that. There's this troubling notion. I mean, you ever heard the phrase cognitive dissonance? Some of you have taken psychology. Did you take psychology? You've got to have psychology again. That was a great class. Who would take psychology if we offered psychology? We should have psychology for sure. Jeff Mazel is great. Anyway, Jeff Mazel taught the UOCHSS psychology class, and there's this theory of cognitive dissonance. Actually, it comes up in this Milgram experiment. Anybody studied the Milgram experiment? What happened in the Milgram experiment?
Oh, wait, maybe different.
They're making a movie about it that's coming out this fall. It's about shocking people.
Oh,
yeah,
that
yeah,
one.
yeah.
Have you heard about that? So,
yeah, no, we read an article on it because we were studying psychology.
so people would sit there, and a guy wearing a white jacket would come up and say, the experiment requires you to continue, and your job is to teach, you know, Jacob here, these word pairs, and then Jacob's actually an actor, so every other time he gets it wrong. And so the experimenter would say, Jacob got it wrong, you got to press the button. And it turned out, when you press the button, it administers what appears to be a horrible electric shock that goes up, right? And then the actor would say, I'm going to have a heart attack, I can't stand the pain. And 2/3 of the people would keep hitting that button. And the boss would say, the experiment requires you to continue. And the way they explained it was cognitive dissonance, among other theories. There are a lot of reasons why people would keep going. But basically, you're committed to a course, and so you rationalize the course. You change your normal instinct, which is, I won't inflict pain on another person. And, and you come up with a new philosophical orientation to rationalize this course of action. Well, that's basically what we did with our theory of race, right? I mean, the United States imported all these slaves. It was pretty clear that we weren't going to end the institution of slavery. And then as we extended the franchise and didn't give it to African Americans or to Native Americans, we had to come up, I'm not saying we should have, but many people came up with an argument as to why this universal democracy shouldn't extend to certain races. And it was a horrible, racist notion, not borne out by any evidence. That Chinese people, that African Americans, that Native Americans, basically anybody who wasn't part of the first wave of immigrants was somehow inferior. And they would say the same thing about Irish people until Irish people got the vote, and then everybody's not Irish and English, right? It's just human nature to be selfish. All right, so there's a notion of the American system, which is sort of an economic program for the presidents following Jefferson, right? What's the American system? First of all, what are they trying to accomplish? I mean, obviously, we're doing pretty well with agriculture, right? We don't really need a lot of government incentives to get agriculture going. We had tobacco. Tobacco was a really popular crop around the world. It exhausted the soil. Now we're transitioning to cotton. There's a bunch of fertile land in the South. They've got the workforce. Doesn't really need a lot of incentives from the government. But what's the other part of our economy that we're trying to strengthen? Especially after the War of 1812, we don't want to be too dependent on Britain. Megan, what are we trying to do?
This could be incorrect, but we were trying to put in new passageways, so it could be not industrial,
Yeah.
but I don't know what you call that, roadways and.
Yeah, no, this is perfect. This is exactly, so just back up a bit. We're trying to strengthen which sector of our economy? Manufacturing, right? I mean, to be sure, roads and transportation networks will help the agricultural economy too. But really this program that's called the American System is, to sort of strengthen our overall economy. The agricultural part's already good. We're trying to get a manufacturing part too, so we can be self-sufficient, not as dependent on imports from countries that we might have to fight. And also so that parts of the United States that didn't have such fertile land, might still have a role to play in the economy. And one thing you'll study, who's in economics? You are, right? Who else? One thing we learn in economics is specialization is the best way to divide up a society. So it's ideal to have New York make stuff in factories. You don't want New Yorkers to farm because their soil's not well suited for farming. And you want to set up transportation so that Midwesterners can farm and sell what they produce to New Yorkers, right? So there are several elements to this so-called American system. If you're trying to create a manufacturing economy where you previously lacked one, what do you need? You mentioned a transportation network. We studied some of this last weekend, right? Transportation network consists of roads, what else? Canals, and anything else? Later, railroads, right? Okay, let's keep going. What's another aspect of this new, policy to encourage manufacturing? Kyra, what would you have?
The National Bank.
Yeah, we need credit. Why do you need a national bank? Why not just rely on whatever the private sector comes up with without any sort of government intervention?
I'm not sure.
Anybody know, why do you need it? Kira?
Because some of the local banks are printing just paper money.
Right.
Crazy, not
Right.
devaluing it.
Yeah, so one thing that we've learned since the turn of the 19th century is that you really have to kind of centralize control of currency or else there'll be a ton of inflation. Because if I'm the governor of my little state and there's not enough credit, well, I'll print some tomorrow and I'll get reelected, right? And this short-sightedness that, hey, I'll just make my own unique currency and give everybody some and now we're better, right? Because there's more money. Of course, that devalues the currency. The buying power of wages goes down, and it's kind of a disaster for the economy in the aggregate. When states are left to their own devices, they'll print way too much money, and what a national bank would do is exert some control over the state banks. For example, require that their currency at any given moment be sort of convertible to specie. You know what specie is? What specie?
Gold
So
and silver.
gold or silver, right? and just kind of hold the local banks accountable, but also have a lot of credit. Nationally, the more credit we have, the more we can invest in industry and on a central level, we might be able to spread it a little farther. So there's one other aspect of this regime. Typically when you're talking about, sort of Alexander Hamilton's plan that the Federalists still like, and that the Whigs will still like, the big government people will still like for decades. It's going to include infrastructure, which is transportation and, means of importing and exporting as between states. And then it's going to include credit, national bank. And what's another thing this Hamiltonian plan typically includes? Megan. Why would this nascent, which means new, nascent manufacturing economy benefit from tariffs? These people thought at the time. Now these days, we don't think tariffs are a very good idea. We're always trying to stop tariffs anywhere in the world now. But back then, why did we think that tariffs were smart? Druthi?
Well, it would make imported goods more expensive, so people would buy things made in.
Exactly, right? Because we can't compete with Britain. Britain's just too good at manufacturing textiles like cloth and blankets from cotton, right? The only way we're going to be able to win or get any market share is by artificially increasing the price of the competitor's goods. And that's what you do with a tariff. Now, who wouldn't like a tariff in the U.S.? Which part of the U.S. would think, tariffs aren't such a good idea? I'm trying to mix this up a bit. Anybody else want to get involved? Go ahead, Kevin.
The South.
Why?
Because the South can't really make their own, they don't have an industrial center, and
Right.
so they can't really make their own stuff, so they do have to buy.
Yeah, some of the early Southern leaders thought, hey, let's get in on this industry too, but it became pretty clear that the planting class wasn't interested. And so then once the South kind of committed to the agrarian path, they realized we sell stuff internationally. That's what we do. And what the North's trying to do is just basically lock down the U.S. market and then eventually the Latin American market, but not so much, sell to Europe, right? So if tariffs provoke a trade war, that's no problem for the North, but it is a problem for the South. Plus, the South would rather have cheap stuff from England, right? It's like Walmart. Some of you may have parents who say, I don't shop at Walmart, support the locals. And some of you may have parents who say, I want cheap stuff and I want more of it, and they've got that at Walmart. I go to Walmart sometimes, I'm not gonna lie. I have cognitive dissonance, there's a term we just talked about. I'm not thrilled about the effect of Walmart on the community. That's kind of what the South is thinking, right? They're thinking, we just want cheap stuff. It's easier to get cheap stuff from the established manufacturers. So the American system includes a new national bank, it includes tariffs, it includes what we call internal improvements or maybe infrastructure, improving roads and bridges and canals and eventually railroads. All right. So banks and money. So what happened to the first national bank? Now Hamilton was the guy who came up with the idea for the first national bank. What happened to it? You may know. Why do we have a second one? We had a first one. Why do we need a second one? Megan knows what happened to the first one.
Charter ran out?
Charter ran out. They were pretty cautious. For example, they would, the Constitution put a moratorium on the slave trade rather than abolishing it. It was kind of, little baby steps whenever they considered going in a new direction. So because there was so much opposition to the first national bank, it was chartered for a period with a limited duration. When did that period run out? Anybody know? Who knows? Megan knows.
Is it 1811?
Yeah, perfect. And what's happening around 1811 that just makes this really inopportune? If you're a proponent of the national bank and you want to see it renewed, you couldn't ask for better timing than for the national bank's charter to expire in 1811. Because what's happened in the next year? Druthi?
The War of 1812.
Yeah, the War of 1812. And that really points to the need for a strong national bank. Why?
Well, they needed money.
Right? The bank is not exactly a government institution, but it exists to support the government. It's kind of given this funky power to tax, which is really unlike the present Federal Reserve. But in some respects, it's supposed to be a private entity that operates for profit. But one of its big, what do you say in French, raison d'etre, reason to exist, is that it's supposed to have an ample supply of credit when the government needs it. And we're fighting countries that are normal creditors. You want to have a big vault in the US. But, ironically, at this time, the First National Bank shuts down. So, the first bank of the US. So, the second bank of the US is chartered, and it's a profit-making corporation that is kind of created under government auspices, and it exists in part to sort of keep a rein on state banks, to control the supply of money, and it doesn't really do that very well, but it sure does it better than state banks, right? It's kind of the prototype of what's now the Federal Reserve. So local banks are valuable to promote economic growth, but they're, like Kira was pointing out, they're prone to overissue money because they don't really have that, concern for the aggregate national welfare that, the central government does. Anyway, with these panics, usually mean what? There's a panic of 1819, a panic of 1837. What does that mean? What probably happened? Whenever you see the word panic in caps, what probably happened in the 19th century? Anybody know? Basically, depressions and panics almost always are attributable, at least in part, to a word that starts with an S. What? Sheldon High School. Sheldon High School concept. No. What other word starts with an S?
Speculation.
Speculation means what?
Getting into the market and
Right.
making maybe questionable.
I mean, just look at all the economic crises we've had in the period you've studied so far. Some of you were in modern American history. The Great Depression was based in part on speculation on the stock market. Or in 2006 through 2008, our most recent recession was based on a bunch of banks speculating that people who couldn't afford a big home will eventually get enough money to pay off that mortgage we wouldn't normally give someone with that income. It's basically risking too much in the hope of a big future windfall, right? And when banks will provide easy credit, somebody says, hey, I want to go out and, the world market looks pretty good for grain. I want to go out and buy a huge amount of land, and I don't really have that much money in my pocket, but if you give me credit and tell me the interest rate, well, hopefully I'll make enough money and I can pay you back. And the banks will say, oh, good, yeah, we'll just print some money. We got a printing press downstairs. We'll just print some money. It's all good. Well, the problem is overextending credit devalues money. And when there's any shock to the system, like Europe doesn't need as much grain as we expected. So now there will be a collapse. And so the bubble bursts in 1819, and so BUS stands for Bank of the United States. The power of the Bank of the United States over the smaller banks was to call in their loans, basically, to demand that, all right, well, we loaned you money, now we want hard money in return. That is, either specie, gold or silver, or notes that we acknowledge, not this overissued currency that you had. And so when the Bank of the United States wants to call in loans, it's not possible. So what happens is European demand for farm products kind of receded and the economic bubble burst. And so Americans distrusted banks. This is a lot of the impetus for Jacksonian democracy, this notion that greedy bankers, I don't really know where they are, but down here in South Carolina, in the western part of South Carolina, where my grandfather was a regulator, and my farm isn't really producing as much as the big plantations out east, I'm resentful. And I think the people who are making my life harder are the bankers. It must be their demand that I repay the loans. So what's McCulloch v. Maryland? The Supreme Court in this era is actually strengthening the federal government. Somebody explain McCulloch v. Maryland, and then we will take a break. Anybody know McCulloch v. Maryland? How many law professors in the room? Is it just me? All right, unless somebody wants to volunteer. Anybody want to volunteer? All right, so the Supreme Court decides that local government can't tax the Bank of the United States. And now, that's kind of obvious under the Supremacy Clause. Like, if you wanted to tax, like, why are our schools so bad right now? Why do we have so little money in Lane County where we used to have a ton of money? Why is everything in this county, built in the 70s? Like, look at the Holt Center. How many things like the Holt Center have been built since the 70s? Zero. Why does our downtown look like somebody got in a time machine and went back to 1970? It's because that's when we had money. And why we had money is the federal government was cutting a lot of timber on federal land, and just kind of out of pity or because we couldn't tax federal land, they wrote us a check every time they, made money off of timber on federal land. But when the spotted owl came and we stopped producing timber on federal land, the federal government is under no obligation to pay any kind of tax to local government. For a while, they made payment in lieu of timber receipts. They just said, forget it. So millions of dollars in revenue were lost, and we can't do a thing. More than half of the land in Lane County is federal land. But a local government and a state government can never tax federal property, federal agencies. And it's a theory that would kind of crystallize over time, but right now, the easiest way to explain it is something called the supremacy clause. Lower echelons of government can't tax higher echelons of government. What they said in McCulloch v. Maryland was the power to tax is the power to destroy. And if a state could tax the National Bank, the state could destroy the National Bank, and maybe some states would because the National Bank was creating greed. This is John Marshall, who is responsible for a lot of really interesting Supreme Court decisions. All right, we're going to talk about the Missouri controversy next, so take a 10-minute break. Get ready to talk about what's going on in Missouri. Okay, back from the break. First, I want to make sure everyone has a printed copy of the syllabus. I think, email you a copy of the syllabus. I'm not sure if everyone printed it. So just be careful. I think I'll hand Jacob the stack. If you can just pass it around. Make sure everyone has a printed copy. This is our Constitution. This is the foundation for the organization of this class. It tells you when we're going to meet, and we are going to stick to the schedule. Thanks. Just pass the stack that we did. Thank you. And I'll make sure those of you who are watching this, I'll make sure there are more copies available when you come to class next. Or is there not class next week? I guess there's not. No. Yeah, there is next weekend. We have both classes next week. Okay. We have been talking about nationalism, the consolidation of power, the American system, this notion that a strong central government might help to foster our manufacturing sector. Well, if we're talking about the era that includes the 1820s, there's a big controversy brewing out west in Missouri. Why? Why is there a controversy in Missouri? You may know. There's not much economic value in Missouri at this time. Not a whole lot going on out there except for some farming, which is nowhere near as important as tobacco or cotton have been. What do you think, Megan?
Well, the Missouri, we wanted to enter as a state.
Yes, remember Thomas Jefferson had set up a system for states in the Northwest, the Ohio Valley to enter, and so it just seemed to be a matter of time before states in the Louisiana Purchase would enter. So here comes Missouri. Why is that complicated?
Because they had a slave population of over 10,000, and then when they proposed something, they go in, they not only wanted to keep their slaves, but they did not want free blacks to be able to control. Right.
So Missouri wants a constitution that continues slavery because they already have 10,000 slaves. A representative from New York, Talmadge, wants very sensibly to just end slavery altogether in the West. That's a little too radical to get nationwide support. So now along comes the Missouri Compromise, which is the first of several sellouts that continue slavery. But you really have to memorize this. It's the kind of stuff that American history classes really dwell on. So what are the provisions of the Missouri Compromise? How will we handle the very controversial admission of Missouri as a slave state, a state with slavery expressly permitted in its constitution? Kyra, what are we going to do?
So Missouri would be introduced as a slave state.
Okay, number one, we add Missouri as a slave state, but there's more.
Maine would be introduced as a free state.
But the territory that is Maine is already in the U.S. What do you mean Maine would be admitted? It's already in the U.S.
As a free state, right?
So it's kind of a trick question.
Oh.
The people who live in Maine are now US citizens, so I don't get what you're saying. I do really, but
Oh.
what do you say? The people in Maine are already
Like on a
US citizens.
political level? I don't know what you're
Does
asking.
anybody, what is the status of Maine at this point? Do you know?
Well, they're part of Massachusetts.
They're part of
Oh,
Massachusetts.
okay, yeah.
So that big area formerly known as the state of Massachusetts is now cut up, so the northeast part becomes its own state. That's totally unrelated to Missouri, other than the fact that they both start with the letter M. Why are these two things happening simultaneously?
To balance out in the Senate.
Right, so the concern is we want to preserve the balance between states that have slaves and states that don't have slaves. We're just going to subdivide existing northern territory to maintain the equipoise between slave and non-slave states. There are two provisions, but there's a third. What's the third provision of the Missouri Compromise? David, is that a hand up?
Yeah, it says that slavery would be banned in all territories north of the Missouri southern border.
Yeah, 3630 is the
Yeah.
latitudinal line for Missouri's southern border. Now, all of Missouri is above that line, but the idea is there won't be any more slave states above that line. So it's partly prescriptive for the future and partly, just carving up existing territory to preserve the balance. Not saying it's good or bad, but there were a lot of deals like this over the next several decades before the Civil War. So the Missouri controversy, kind of ends or begins to challenge this era of good feelings where there's pretty much one party and not as much controversy within the United States, still kind of celebrating the victory against Great Britain, or the draw, if you will. But the absence of political party disputes was replaced now by sectionalism, north versus south, different sections of the country fighting each other. Missouri wants to be a state. In 1819, debate arises over slavery, and the Missouri Compromise is adopted by Congress in 1820. Missouri is admitted to the Union as a slave state, but the second provision is that Maine is cleaved off of Massachusetts and will be a free state, so the number of slave and free states remains the same. Congress will prohibit slavery above Missouri's southern border, 3630 is the latitude line, in the rest of the Louisiana Purchase. So this is the Louisiana Purchase, right? And so Missouri is the only part that will be allowed to have slaves. So all of these states will be admitted, goes the plan, as non-slave states. And then Maine had been part of Massachusetts, if I remember correctly. It seems odd because they don't really join except for that little area where they are contiguous. So Maine's now admitted as a free state, but I'm pretty sure Maine's territory was part of the U.S. before that. I'll double check that, but I'm pretty sure. All right, so now nationalism is an issue. The Missouri debate highlights the fact that the westward expansion of slavery is going to divide our nation, where there had been several circumstances like the War of 1812 that brought us together. The war against Indians maybe in the West was a unifying circumstance. This was very much a divisive circumstance. I mean, look, we're 30 years out from the Civil War, 40 years out from the Civil War. And, this will be the number one basis for division between North and South. Economic issues too. What's going on in Latin America? Well, in the early part of the 19th century, Spain lost its grip on its Latin American colony. And so countries like Mexico, all sorts of countries in Latin America began rebelling against Spanish rule, and it was very hard for Spain to retain those colonies, and Spain basically will eventually lose all those colonies. Now, you might wonder why the U.S. became one territory, but the Spanish holdings became several different territories, different countries. And it's partly because of just geography, especially when you take Brazil out of the mix, which is a huge chunk of South America. There's not really, much center of gravity. You just got this kind of linear, Spanish area. So you've got basically the south and east and north of South America, and then the peninsula, and then Mexico. It doesn't really lend itself to a cohesive nation. And plus there were, many different ethnicities because the native populations survived better than they did in the US. So basically Spain's Latin American colonies broke free, and actually they established their own constitutions, and as we'll discuss in a moment, their constitutions were better than ours. You know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, one of the Supreme Court justices, is kind of famous for saying at one point that the US Constitution is not the best in world history. Everybody's like, you traitor! Well, good thing you have life tenure. You shouldn't be running your mouth like that, but it's the truth. It was a prototype for constitutions. It excluded a lot of people from participation in the citizenry, and the truth is that subsequent constitutions were better. In Latin America, citizens could join the polity who were of African descent, who were of native descent. It's partly because the ratios of colonists to native people were not weighted so heavily in favor of the colonists, and it's partly because they just took literally the Declaration of Independence and said, well, equality means what it means. How are we going to say all these people who participated in the Revolutionary War don't count? Doesn't make sense. Anyway, now the Monroe administration has a problem vis-a-vis Europe. Why is the Monroe administration getting worried about Europe? Now, you might think, hey, Latin America just kicked Europe out. This is a time we shouldn't worry about Europe at all. But no, there was a big worry. What's the worry? Who knows? 1820s, why are we nervous now about Europe? Ironically, now that Europe no longer controls a lot of South America, why are we more worried about Europe? Anybody know? It's because there's a vacuum. There is, unconquered territory, which is now, a scarce commodity in the world, other than Africa, some parts of Asia. There's not really as much unconquered land as there used to be, and typically the European nations go in and take it, and when they arrive, there's going to be war. And so the U.S. saw this opportunity to do what with the Western Hemisphere? What seemed like the smart play with the Western Hemisphere? Anybody know? What did they decide to do? You know what the Western Hemisphere means. Anybody know what that term means? What does it mean? What's hema mean? Half, right? And so it's the whole western half of the globe. North America, Central America, South America. Who is the advisor for James Monroe, who comes up with the plan for how we're going to deal with Latin America? Anybody know? It's the name we've been talking about. Very distinguished career. Kira knows.
John Quincy Adams.
John Quincy Adams is the one who figures out what we're going to do. And what does he decide? It'll become the Monroe Doctrine because James Monroe will announce it as sort of the policy of the U.S. vis-a-vis Europe from this point forward. And it's, it's about the U.S. sort of coming into our own. What do we announce? There are several terms to it. Tiffany.
No new European colonization.
Yeah, we will regard European colonization anywhere in the Western Hemisphere as a direct threat to our interest. Europe, stay out of this half of the globe. This is no longer open for colonization, which is pretty bold because our Navy's still not very strong. What's another provision?
U.S. would abstain from European war.
Yeah, well, and what interest do we have in European wars? It's not given away much, but it kind of seems symmetrical. If we want Europe to stay out of the Western Hemisphere, we won't intervene in European wars. And there's a third provision.
Europeans should not interfere with new Latin American republics.
Right, and so you can imagine various ways in which European countries might interfere short of colonizing, right? I mean, they might try and manipulate what's going on, and he was trying to just capture any sort of interference, right? So 3 is a lot like 1, right? But, it basically stands for the proposition, Europe, stay out of the Western Hemisphere. And the United States will not get involved in Europe, just as George Washington suggested we keep our hands off of Europe. All right, so the U.S. was pleased to see Latin American wars for independence, but also nervous, and also a little ashamed, if they had any sense, because they realized that Latin Americans did democracy right. They allowed blacks and Indians or natives to vote. So we passed the Monroe Doctrine, which means exactly what Tiffany said. First of all, no more European colonization in the Western Hemisphere. U.S. will abstain from European wars, and we're not going to see Europe interfere in the Western Hemisphere, or, implicitly the threat is we'll go to war. So along comes the election of 1824. Now we've had Madison and Monroe each serve for 8 years. So what we had is basically 3 double-term presidents, all from Virginia. And now there's not another Virginian in the mix, and it's going to be a wide open race. There are actually 4 people vying for the presidency. And the most popular among them is Andrew Jackson, because he's a war hero. He's kind of different from the rest. So Andrew Jackson's the only one who has any sort of national stature, and you would expect him to win. But also with 4 candidates back before a clear 2-party system, we don't have anyone receiving a clear majority. Now, just like we saw with Jefferson back in 1800, there's going to be a bit of a controversy, right? So now the election goes to the House of Representatives, and now there's going to be a lot of backdoor dealing, basically. This much smaller group of people, I think originally the House of Representatives wasn't even 100 representatives. They have to decide who's going to be the president. I can't remember how many they had at this point, but barely more than 100, I'm guessing. So Henry Clay of Kentucky was another Southerner. And so Andrew Jackson thought, well, naturally, Clay from Kentucky is going to have, some sympathy for Jackson from Tennessee, because those states are so similar geographically, economically. He thought, oh, I got this. Clay's going to support me. Instead, Clay threw his support to John Quincy Adams from Massachusetts, who, wasn't quite the magnetic personality, wasn't as charismatic, but had a lot of relevant credentials. And a lot of people at the time thought, well, Clay is just trying to set himself up to have a high-ranking position in John Quincy Adams' administration. And in fact, he did get a high-ranking position. And so this starts a lot of resentment that Jackson and his supporters feel toward Henry Clay. They call it the corrupt bargain. And basically the 4 candidates were Jackson, Adams, Crawford, Clay. Here's a map. Jackson got all the red states. He's really popular out west and to some degree in the north, but mostly south and west. Adams gets the blue states, which have a lot of influence. They're populous now. Some of the population and economic power is swinging to the north. Crawford doesn't make such a big showing, and Clay doesn't do much damage at all. But when Clay allies with Adams, Adams becomes president. Now, Adams is very much like his father, very unapologetically in favor of a strong central government. And, he's all in with a strong central government, not just the big 3, strong central bank, tariffs, and infrastructure. He wants like a national university. He wants a naval academy, which will eventually happen. We'll never have a national university, but he has the most unequivocal support for a strong national government we've seen so far. Supports the American system. We've talked about what that is. Not a very, charismatic leader, but pretty sterling resume. He probably had the best pre-presidential resume. He had been, the author of the Monroe Doctrine, been this international diplomat, been a senator from Massachusetts. He had this weird notion. Look, everybody from every party claims liberty is what they're, supporting. And he says strong federal power brings liberty. Liberty, as this book is kind of pointed out by now, really means whatever it means in the eyes of whoever wants to twist that term for selfish purposes. But he had this notion that the stronger the federal government, the better we'll be at promoting the interests of all our citizens. And, there's a point to it, I suppose. But his plans alarmed a lot of people not from the Northeast. Martin Van Buren is kind of the original party functionary. He's, and one of you made the remark that this is an era when we see the parties matter a lot more. Well, Martin Van Buren is going to be a great behind-the-scenes organizer. He's also a politician in his own right. He'll eventually be president, but he's not so good as president. But his great contribution to history is he kind of rallied the Democratic Party by pointing out what was wrong with Adams. And so now we have a clear dichotomy where Adams wants a strong central government and he wants to favor the Northeast, right? Basically, it's the Whig platform, what he stands for will be, the sort of Whig platform in the future. And then Adams' political rivals, who are the Democrats, not the Republican Democrats, but the plain D Democrats, will be all about individual liberties, states' rights, limited federal government. And Martin Van Buren realized now that the country is so big, you really need party coordination to achieve victory, and boy did he figure out how to manipulate the national vote. And he established a political apparatus that became the Democratic Party. Andrew Jackson campaigned against John Quincy Adams, and remember the Adams rule. All of our presidents up until Jackson served 2 terms unless their name was Adams. All the Adams just got 1 term, because then the family got 8 years between them. That's how I remember it. But because we have a lot of people who, aren't economic elites voting, it stands to reason that the candidate of the common man would, be more effective. He wins, and there's a much higher percentage of political participation, and, basically the propaganda for Jackson stresses that he's a populist, he's the man of the people. Look at this resounding victory. Now, a lot of these states are just big and don't have a lot of people. But even when you do the percentage of the national population, Adams only won 32%, which is pretty small. You hardly ever see presidential elections have a worse split than 60-40. So now we have a new, those of you who took political science, who took political science? You? Anybody else? Oh yeah. Remember we had different party eras? Now we're about to shift gears into a new party era, which is going to be the Democrats, with Jackson as their leader, and the Whigs, the opposition to the Democrats. So politics is now, a whole different game. We have party machines, we have the spoils system, because Jackson believed in rotation of office, which is another way of saying, my guys get a serve, because that gives them an incentive to help me. But, ostensibly he's saying, we need new blood, we need, people who haven't been in government forever, and that will rejuvenate government. And we have national conventions choosing candidates instead of just, a bunch of rich guys in the back room. Now it breaks down to 2 parties, and there's a very clear division. Democrats have the viewpoint that we want a small national government. They're basically usually Southerners and Westerners, although not exclusively. They're concerned about individual liberty. They don't want the government imposing morality. And really, this southern wing, the Democrats in the South will continue to be kind of a tight-knit group that stays together for over a century. And the Democrats don't want government intervention in the economy. They want a weak central government. They don't like the national bank. They don't like tariffs. Now the Whigs want the national government to be strong. They want the national government to create conditions that will foster the growth of industry. They want tariffs. They want a big national bank. They want the government sort of policing morality. So public and private definitions of American freedom, the Democrats want more individual privacy. They want a weak federal government, kind of went over that. Democrats want reduced federal expenditures, reduced tariffs. Jackson will destroy the national bank. Even though the national bank was doing a pretty good job keeping the state banks from going out of control, there was a pretty arrogant leader of the national bank who kind of said, matter of fact, I can destroy state banks. And I think fundamentally Jackson was a very pugnacious, belligerent guy. He's like, well, not if I destroy you first. And so he vetoed the extension of the national bank charter, or the U.S. bank charter. Democrats opposed, the government's attempt to impose a single moral vision on society. Whigs want a strong federal government. A lot of this is redundant. Public morality, etc. Okay, Calhoun. Hey, do you remember J.T. Flowers used to play for Lincoln, had the funny socks, got recruited by Arizona State. Well, he went to my son's college, and he played on my son's basketball team, but quit before my son got there. Anyway, he now is the #1 advocate on the Yale campus to change the name of Calhoun College. Yale has 12 different residential colleges. One's named after John Calhoun because he went to Yale. and he went on to be a very famous senator, but famous for some reasons that we're not too fond of now. And so J.T. Flowers is always writing, opinion pieces for the Yale Daily News saying, there shouldn't be a Calhoun College. He's making a pretty good point. John C. Calhoun is a states' rights theorist. He's from South Carolina, and he says states should have the power of nullification. I'm just going to go through this quickly so we can get you done by 2010. Take your time. States' rights theorists say that states are the most important level of government, and when the federal government oversteps its bounds, when the federal government does something the states don't like, states may properly nullify that federal legislation within the state's boundaries. The federal government can impose it somewhere else, but not in the state. It's kind of like what we're doing now with marijuana law, this notion that, hey, our state's kind of different, that's great, we want to do what we want to do. And so John C. Calhoun says South Carolina doesn't have to abide by this tariff that the federal government has enacted. And so Kira was telling us that for the most part, Jackson had been pro-states' rights, but Jackson hates defiance. I mean, it's more personal with him, I believe. And Jackson says, well, I've been a general, and I don't like constituent parts telling the boss what to do. So he passes, his allies pass the force bill, which basically says, we'll force you to pay this tariff. And so they get this showdown ready, and South Carolina is kind of digging in its heels, and that's when they kind of negotiate a truce. Congress lowers the tariff, but neither side really budged. It was just an interesting showdown that set the stage for the Civil War, because South Carolina will be the first to secede from the Union. Daniel Webster from the North, right, is this famous orator who believes that the law derives from the will of the people. The federal government gets its power from the collective will of the people. Calhoun says, nope, it gets it from the states, and so the state authority is superior. Anyway, the nullification crisis is resolved when a new tariff basically lowers the rates, and South Carolina abides by it. But Calhoun, who had been a Democrat, said, forget it. I'm not going to be a Democrat anymore, because Jackson is my adversary. He's a Democrat. So we've already talked about Indian removal and the Trail of Tears. Jackson, unlike Jefferson, right? Remember Jefferson said, look, Indians are our equals, and eventually they'll be assimilated. And he was pretty enlightened about Native Americans, not immediately, but thought down the road Native Americans can join this country and stay put. Well, the 5 civilized tribes, including the Cherokee, the Choctaw, they played by the rules, and they had basically stayed in the native ancestral lands. But the state of Georgia said, you're going to move. And the Supreme Court heard an appeal by the Cherokee Nation. And he said, the Cherokee Nation, they're the wards of the federal government. And so no one's really rooting for the Native Americans, but John Marshall is saying, you know what, any attempt to meddle with the federal government's relationship with Native Americans is a threat to the federal government. And so basically he insisted that was a violation of the Federal Supremacy Clause, and that's when the Native Americans, some of the Seminoles fought back. That's the tribe in Florida, but basically that's when Andrew Jackson said, if the federal government is, if the Supreme Court's going to say the federal government controls the Indians and Georgia can't do a thing, well, go ahead, Supreme Court, enforce your judgment. Go ahead and use your military. Oh, wait. That's right. I control the military. That's kind of how Jackson rolled. He's just all about the use of force. He said, you want to stick up for the Indians? Good luck, you 9 guys in robes. Good luck with that. We'll see how that goes. And so they basically moved the Cherokee, the Creek, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, and the Seminoles. Although the Seminoles put up a pretty good fight. Moved them all to what is now Oklahoma for the most part. There's a big controversy over whether we should name football teams after, or have sports mascots named after Native Americans. And I think one view I've heard that kind of makes sense to me, I respect differences of opinion, is terms like the Redskins are disrespectful, and if the tribes don't like them, get rid of teams like that. But there's actually a lot of pride in Florida over how the Seminole Nation defied the United States. And apparently, the Florida State football program called the Seminoles has support from the tribes, has support from the local population. It's like a celebration of the defiance of the symbol. All right, so this guy named Biddle is running the second bank of the United States, and he's really tough. He really takes control over the local banks and demands that they be accountable, that they not issue currency except to the extent that they can basically back it with gold and silver, call them on their loans. But Jackson, of course, hates bankers. They're non-producers. They don't make stuff with their hands, right? So Jackson wants to basically get rid of the Second National Bank, and he does it. So Biddle's bank is up for renewal. Biddle's the head of the Second Bank of the United States, and Jackson vetoes it. And so the second bank's charter expires, so now instead we have a bunch of state banks, and so the federal government puts its money in state banks, which is inconceivable to them. They're called pet banks because Jackson would put federal money in some bank because someone in his cabinet had a relative on the board of directors of the bank. Just total disaster. So of course the banks print 10 times as much currency. The value of state-issued banknotes increases tenfold. Massive inflation, we've already gone over this. Fuels a boom in speculation, just a big disaster. And so by now, foreign creditors say, forget it. And they're calling in loans, and the bank doesn't have gold and silver to back the loans. So you have the panic of 1837. It's another kind of recession, not quite a depression, more of a recession. Too much speculation fueled by overissuance of banknotes, and cotton exports decline, and so you have another mess like in 1819. Okay, Jackson serves 2 terms. The person who got him elected is Martin Van Buren. Really good at the political game, not so good at being president. So his presidency isn't very noteworthy. This takes us to 1814. And now that politics is just a game, the Whigs nominate William Henry Harrison, another military hero. What's the most noteworthy thing about his term in office? He's a Whig. If you had to describe his term in office with one word, what would that word be?
Short,
Short. How short?
1 month.
1 month. He didn't even have much enthusiasm about the Whig platform. I mean, that was just a bad choice for the Whigs. Anyway, so then Tyler takes over. They call him His Excellency because he wasn't supposed to be president. But we don't have to talk much about Tyler. Harrison dies a month after he takes office. And Tyler doesn't turn out to be very sympathetic to the Whigs who supported him. Instead of pushing along the American system, like tariffs and the infrastructure improvements and the National Bank, he's kind of more inclined to support the Democratic stuff. All right, let's get a quiz going. Could everybody please sit with a chair in between you and your neighbor? And once you're set up like that, I'll give you a quiz.